How's it going with you folks? Am I starting my Snagit? Yes, I am. Okay, cool. Let's get this thing started. All right, so what we're going to be talking about is we're moving into chapter 3 and we're talking about the cell cycle and cell division. And so what you see here is something we don't necessarily have in Hawaii, but we do kind of have seasons in Hawaii. We got wet and dry, right? Like right now, we're in the slightly wet season versus the slightly drier season of. Yeah, didn't I start it off this class with what's up? What's going on, algebra? Or no, not algebra. What's going on, seventh grade science students? Let's get this party started. We're talking about cell cycle and cell division. And so, what do you see here? You have, well, we have summer, spring, and fall. But what do you see here? This would be kind of the cycle of a different tree, or the same tree, but at different times of the year. And this happens mainly in like Northern America and, not where we're at, obviously. But what I want to talk about is the cycle that it goes through. So you have well, this has got to be winter. So this must be, let's see, fall. And this is spring. That's got to be summer. Did I get that right? Wait. Winter, spring, summer, and fall. Okay, let's see. This picture looks a little out of order to me. Right? Maybe this is spring up here, and this is summer, and this is fall, and then winter, spring, summer, fall. Yeah, there we go. It's going counterclockwise. Yeah, all right. So what it's talking about is the cycle of just different things that we have inside of our in nature. What we're going to talk about is the cycle that cells go through. So most cells in an organism go through a full cycle of growth and development. And so let's see. Can I type? Cells. So most cells in an organism go through a cycle of growth, development, and division. All right, cool. Can you guys see that, what I just typed up there? All right, cool. So we're moving on. So the cell cycle that we are going to be talking about, the cell cycle happens as this kind of reoccurring cycle. And the thing that confused me with the cell cycle is I was thinking that the cell goes through the same cycle every time. And it's, how like in this picture over here, we could have like the same tree going through the different stages and then it repeating itself, right? Well, with the cell cycle, what happens is it kind of starts here, and then it goes around the cycle, and then it goes to the end of the cycle, and then the cell no longer exists. So this is kind of not, like I think of a cycle as something that happens over and over again. This is kind of a one trip all the way around, and then that's it. I'll explain to you kind of what's going on here. Most of the cycle that we have takes place in what we call the interphase. Now the interphase is this blue part over here. And this is a lot of most of the cell cycle happens during this blue part called the interphase. And what happens during the interphase? Well, we can break this interphase up into 3 parts, okay? There's the G1 part, the S part, and then the G2 part. So G1, why G1? Or how come it's called G1? Well, I guess to me that means it's the growth, the first stage of growth. So call it G1. Does that make sense? Yes, hello, yeah, you can hear me. All right, cool. And then the next stage we call the synthesis phase. So that's why it's called the S phase or whatever. It's the phase within this thing called the interphase. So now the interphase is all this blue stuff. And then the next part right here is a second growth stage. So we call it C2. And that stands for what this second growth stage is usually the cell preparing for cell division. Now, cell division happens in these last two parts right over here, and we call that phase the mitotic phase. Let me write all this down because maybe, okay, so the blue stuff, the blue part of this graph is the interphase, the period during the cell cycle of a cell's growth. All right, and then the yellow part is called the mitotic phase, mitotic phase. And this yellow part is much shorter, and it contains two different parts called mitosis and cytokinesis. And it's basically where the cell breaks down into two different types of cell, or into it breaks apart and it duplicates into two different cells. So then after that, you no longer have just this one cell. What happens is this thing breaks down into two cells. Yeah, this is the archive's on. We're archiving this already. But this thing breaks down into two different cells. Now, why do they call it a cell cycle? Well, it's because once these things break down into two separate cells, the cell starts this cycle all over again. Those two separate cells start this cycle all over again. So then it goes to a G1 phase, then an S phase, then a G2 phase, then a mitosis, then cytokinesis. And then that cytokinesis breaks that thing down into two more cells. And then those two cells go through the G1, S, G2, all of that kind of stuff. Does that make sense as to why it's called a cycle? So it's not a cycle in the sense that it's happening on the same thing and it's just going through, its different cycles. It's a cycle in the sense that it is the process is being repeated, but it's being repeated on different cells. Okay, all right. Let's talk about each of these things in depth. All right. First thing I want to kind of talk about real quick is how long does the cycle take? Well, it really depends on what type of cell you're talking about. For example, a lot of the eukaryotic cells take as short as, they can take between as short as like 8 minutes for it to go through this full cycle. It could take as long as a full year to go through this full cycle. So depending on the different types of cells you have, it will take a different amount of time. Most human cells that we have in our body takes about 24 hours. So you have one cell, and then you'll have that one cell will go through that full cycle of interphase with the G1, S, G2, and then the mitosis and cytokinesis in about 24 hours, so every day. All right, so some of these really divide quickly. Like, for example, this egg of a zebrafish, that would be this one right here, it divides up into 256 cells in 2.5 hours. Super quick. Isabella, if you got to go, then you got to go. Yes, you can watch the archive. I'm going to definitely be posting it. All right. Now, one of the things that happens in the interphase is, let's see, the interphase, the nuclei of an animal cell and plant cell contain long, thin strands of DNA, and it's called chromatin. The chromatin, if you were to really zoom in on this, and what this is scientists have put a dye, so like food coloring or something like that, not literally food coloring, but something that will turn this thing special color so we can see it, you can actually, it will look like a big plate of spaghetti. This is another picture of chromatin that's inside of this, inside of a cell. And it looks like all these little strands of spaghetti that are all kind of tangled together. What happens here is the DNA, which is called chromatin, is long thin strands, and what happens is it's preparing itself to break down into or to replicate itself. All right. So we talked about the different phases of the cells. So there's the interphase and the mitotic phase. Within the interphase, you have three different parts: the G1, S, and G2. G1 stands for growth 1, I guess. S stands for synthesis, and I'm assuming G2 stands for growth, the second part. In G1, you have growth of the cellular functions and organelle replication. In S, you have growth of chromosome replication. So what's happening in the S stage is the cells continue to grow and copies its DNA. There are now two identical strands of the DNA. So what happens is, let me see if I have this picture right here. Okay, here we go. We have a strand of those spaghetti strands. What happens in the S stage is these two DNA strands, the chromatids, you have two copies. It's kind of like, maybe the best way to think about this is like, say that this is a butterfly wing over here. On this side is a butterfly wing. And on the right side, there's an identical butterfly wing. And so the butterfly has two wings, and it's connected in the middle, called let me see if I can pronounce that correct, a centromer. And it's connected in the middle by the centromer, and it's got two identical wings. Does that kind of make sense to you? And then the last stage of the interphase, that would be that blue graph that I have, is this G2 phase, where the cell continues to get ready for mitosis, and it uses a lot of the energy made in the S stage to do that. So that's kind of what's going on there. Does that kind of make sense? All right. So then what happens is, after we went through the G1S and G2 phase, we go into mitosis and cytokinesis. We're entering the mitotic phase. So we moved from the interphase to that yellow part of that graph, the mitotic phase. Now, here's what's going on with the mitotic phase. This part might be a little bit confusing. Let's see if I can help you to understand this. In the mitotic phase, let's talk about mitosis specifically. Okay? So let me go back to my original picture. All right? All right. So I've talked to you about G1 phase. I've talked to you about how the DNA will break down into those sister chromatids. And then I talked to you a little bit about the G2 phase. Now we're going into mitosis phase right here. This light yellow portion. So there's two parts to it. There's mitosis and cytokinesis. Within mitosis, there's going to be four things that happen. And so, like, 4 subphases or 4 smaller parts that happen. So I'm going to go into talking to you about those things right now. There's a lot of this stuff to cover, and if I don't show you this big picture, a lot of times people get confused. So I'm kind of going back to this thing. We've talked about the interphase, now we're going into the mitotic phase, which we're talking about mitosis specifically, which we are going to break down into 4 parts. All right. The 4 parts of mitosis are the prophase, the metaphase, the anaphase, and the telophase. Let me explain to you what each part is doing, okay? In the prophase, what happens is, do you remember how our DNA when I told you about the DNA, it looked kind of like a spaghetti soup kind of deal with a bunch of noodles uh, all over the place? Well, what happens in the prophase is these DNA, what they do is they kind of condense and untangle themselves and they form chromosomes. So then this big ball of this big bowl of noodles that kind of uh, formed together and formed what, remember I showed you what it kind of looks like, those butterflies, like the left side looks identical to the right side. They're exact copies of each other, actually, of each of these things. All right. All of this stuff happened within the nucleus, but what happens is the nucleus will start to disappear in the prophase. And then these things right here, these are called like the spindle fibers. What happens is the spindle fibers what will happen is they'll move to separate sides of each other, and then they'll connect to the chromosomes like that. Okay? Is this making sense to you? All right. The second stage of mitosis is the metaphase. Now, in the metaphase, what happens is they take all the chromosomes, these chromosomes like this, and they line them up all in the middle. Okay? Because remember, what's going to have to happen is we're going to have to end up breaking these apart so that way we can have two cells that have the identical pieces of information. So they take all the butterflies and they line them all up in the middle. And these spindle fibers grab onto each of these things. Does that make sense? It takes a hold of each wing. The one on the left grabs onto the left wing. The one on the right grabs onto the right wing. Then what happens is these spindle fibers will begin to shorten. So these strings that are holding on to the different parts of the butterfly wings begin to shorten, and it pulls these things apart. And what happens is these chromosomes will break in half. Now, don't worry, we're not literally talking about a butterfly, but I was just kind of showing you that, as kind of an example of the left side and the right side being identical. Well, what's nice about it is each side will get a wing, which means each side will get exactly the same piece of information. The left side will get, one side of it, and the right side will get an identical copy. Does that make sense? I know. I realized after I made the butterfly analogy, I was like, wow, this is going to get gory. We're going to end up ripping butterflies in half. But you don't have butterflies inside of your cells right now. I'm just kind of use that as an analogy so that you can understand. Okay, when these chromosomes these chromosomes over here, they're like two halves of I don't know. It goes back to a butterfly. Two halves of a butterfly, where the left side and the right side are identical to each other, and we need to split this information in half. So then one of these spindle fibers, or one of these spindles gets one piece of information. The other spindle gets the right piece of the information, but they're all getting the same exact piece of information. So what happens is this cell isn't two separate things yet, but it begins to lengthen. You have a cell that's going from a straight up circle to more of a oval shape. It's because these spindle fibers are pulling these chromosomes apart. So in the purple picture, you can actually see, you can see the chromosomes forming, you can see them lining up over here, and then you can actually see them start to pull each other apart. And then the last phase of mitosis is the telophase, and what happens there is the nuclear membrane forms around the chromatin. And so what happens is, see this membrane right here? It will start to kind of cut these things off, cut the strings that are attached, and voila, we have two new cells that have identical pieces of information on the left side and the right side. And these new cells are called daughter, what are they called? They're called daughter cells. Is that what it is? Yeah, I believe they're called daughter cells. Let's see. Let me just make sure. No, that's French because it doesn't say here, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is. All right, and then kind of tied into the overlapping part of mitosis. At the end of mitosis, you have this telophase. But that kind of overlaps with the cytokinesis, and what happens is in cytokinesis, the cell wall actually will break apart the two things and actually physically form the two different cells. So it's kind of a little blur between these last two parts where you have the mitosis and cytokinesis. But basically what happens is you'll have this thing cleaving the connection between these two parts right here. So what's the advantage of cell division? Okay, well, what happens is cell division is really important in reproduction. Yeah, I think, doesn't class finish at 11:20 though? Or is it 11:15? I think it's 11:25, to be honest with you. But why don't I finish this, and I'll talk a little bit about lesson 2, and then we'll finish early. And then on Wednesday, I'll just finish off lesson 2, and then you've got all of the stuff that you need for the rest of this quarter. I'm not going to lecture on anything new after that. All right. So one of the advantages is reproduction. In certain single cell organisms, this cellular division process is the only way that these cells can actually reproduce. Another way is growth. But organisms, the ones that we're used to, are probably multicellular organisms, so more than one cell. Like humans have more than one cell. But the crazy thing is, they actually begin from one cell. They start off as one cell. Okay, they start off as one cell. If they start off as a sperm and an egg, the egg gets fertilized, that's a single cell. And then what happens is 24 hours after the fertilization, this thing continues on and continues breaking apart and continues to duplicate itself and divide itself for the next few years of human life. Another one is replacement. For example, cells need to replace each other because they're constantly also dying off. Like you're thinking, hey, if my cells are duplicating each other every 24 hours, wouldn't I grow twice as big every 24 hours? And the answer is no, because, like, for example, on the surface of your skin, parts of your skin is constantly being flaked off or being peeled off, and the cells are just dying. So your cells are rapidly dividing underneath, so that way they can replace the new ones, or the new ones can replace the old ones that are being divided. Another one is repair. For example, when your bones break, the cells will actually go through, they'll be triggered and they'll say, hey, we got to duplicate a bunch of these new cells so that we can make new bone cells, so that way we can piece these broken pieces back together, and we have some glue that holds them together. Not everything duplicates itself. For example, a lot of nerve cells, they actually only go through one part of the phase, because I told you there's a whole bunch of different parts. I think they only go through the G1 phase, and then they stop. They're like, we're done. We're not going to go through the rest of it. We're just going to go through G1, stop. So the problem with that is sometimes when you have like certain nerve injuries or nerve cell injuries, the nerves don't, the nerve damage will often be permanent, because those cells won't regenerate themselves. Is that interesting to you? Are we cool with that? All right. So, I'm going to recap. I know that I've gone through this thing a lot, but I'd like to kind of just recap real quick. All right. So, for the cell cycle, we have like 5 different really big phases. Technically, technically there's only two of these big phases. There's the interphase and the mitotic phase. But within the interphase, there's 3 different parts. There's the G1 stage, there's the S synthesis stage, and then there's the G2 stage. Got it? And then in the G1 phase, we have growth, and a lot of the organelle is being replicated. And then in the S phase, we have our DNA replication. And then the G2 phase, it's more replication, but mostly preparing for the mitotic phase that's coming up. Then in mitosis, we have 4 different parts. Within the mitotic phase, there's 2 different parts. There's mitosis and cytokinesis. The mitosis has 4 different parts associated with it. There's the prophase, which we're talking about organizing these things into chromosomes. The nucleus breaks up. There's the metaphase, where we line up all of these things, so that way when we break these things apart, they'll nicely break apart, and we'll have the same exact things on the left side as the right side. And then the anaphase, which is the actual process of breaking these things apart. These strings shorten, and then that thing breaks apart. And then the telophase, where we actually have like, okay, now that we have these things separated, let's cut down the middle. Does that make sense to you? That's the recap of everything we just covered. To be honest with you, I had to, when I learned this stuff, I had to kind of really review it and read it a couple times for me to understand it. So that's why when I'm asking you guys to read it and then I'm explaining it to you guys, hopefully now it's like, oh, okay, I see the big picture. Now I can read it and find out all the details of what the heck he was talking about. And you guys are all tripping out because there's tiny doctors living in our bodies. Yes. Okay. So, life's organization, the levels of organization. So, one of the things we can talk about, and we're moving into lesson 2 of chapter 3. One of the things we can talk about is the different kind of cells that we have. For example, in a Komodo dragon isn't made up of all the same cells. A Komodo dragon is made up of blood cells, it's made up of nerve cells, and it's made up of all these different kind of specialized cells that is used for protection. And all these cells work together, so that way this organism can survive. So some organisms are only made up of one cell. The whole thing, the whole body of these organisms, which often are called amoebas, are made up of only one cell. And so all of the different processes have to take place within this one cell. So let me talk to you about unicellular organisms. For example, unicellular organisms, they have to eat, they have to get rid of waste, and they have to respond, all within the same one cell. So here's a picture of a amoeba, that's this thing right here, and what's happening is it's actually eating another single cellular organism, a type of algae, which is called desmid. It eats that for food. There's a prokaryotic cell, and remember I talked to you about the 2 different types of unicellular organisms. There's the prokaryotics and the eukaryotics. Now the prokaryotics have a lot of the similar stuff that the eukaryotics have. The big difference is they're much simpler. They don't have a lot of the organelles that the eukaryotics have, and also they don't have a nucleus to kind of differentiate where the DNA is and everything. Here's a really cool one that I really like. Oh, this prokaryotic cell right here lives in some pretty radical environments. This one is a heat-loving bacteria that's found in the hot springs. And what it actually does is it feeds on sulfur, and it also, it feeds on sulfur as opposed to like light that most plants feed on. All right, it seems that you guys are getting restless. I'll tell you what, why don't we just end class here and I'll start talking about multicellular organisms later. Next Wednesday, this Wednesday. All right, cool. Talk to you later. Oh, wait. Were you guys having trouble with the microscope? Some of you were having trouble with the microscope. Were you having trouble pulling it up? Or was it taking pictures of it? All right, here's what I'm going to say. Oh, go for it, Faustine. Give me your advice because that'd be good. But here's what I'm going to say: is if you guys can get it working, as far as the pulling the file up, then don't worry about solving or don't worry about taking the pictures. I'll give you free points for all of those pictures. So I think that the homework is worth 20 points. The first two ones are 5 points each, and that's where you have to upload pictures. And then the second one is where you have to answer a question. That's worth 10 points. I want you to definitely answer the question. Don't worry about the pictures. I'll give you the free 10 points for it. Because I'm not sure why the computer's not letting you upload those. Now, if you can't open the file, that's a different story. Maybe try a different browser. That might work. All right. Hopefully that works out for you guys. All right, I'll talk to you later. See you in virtual class on Wednesday. Yeah, that's fine. You can put a link for me to go to look at the pictures. I'm fine with that.